My name's Pete Woods. You're watching Hexham TV. Who are you?
My name is William Clouston. I lead the Social Democratic Party and I'm a candidate in the general election for Hexham.
William, how many candidates are your party standing in the general election?
Throughout the whole land we're standing 122, which is an amazing achievement, I think, for a party our size, particularly given a snap election, but I'm delighted with that. And it gives us the chance to do a party election broadcast, which we've filmed and should be out quite shortly.
So for those people that won't recognise the SDP as a party, perhaps some of the younger people particularly, what is the SDP and where did it originate?
Its history is basically as a breakaway from the Labour Party in 1981. It was very successful in the 80s. It teamed up with the Liberal Party and fought 2 general elections and came third, a good third in those. It was kicked to the grassroots in 1990 and basically stayed there until about 7 or 8 years ago. Then it started growing again and it's enjoying a resurgence now. Politically, I describe it as a party of the conservative left. So I don't like generalisations, but very broadly, we are probably to the right of the Tories on culture, and we are to the left of the Labour Party on economics. So it's a blend of red and blue politics.
Now, to some people's surprise, in the Hexham constituency, the Reform Party have not put up a candidate locally. Have you, the SDP, made a pact with the Reform Party not to stand in certain constituencies?
We have, yeah. We negotiated a very limited election pact with them 2 years ago. And the fact that they're not standing in Hexham was no surprise to me because we basically negotiated that. So it's a very small pact. I think it was deliberately negotiated quite limited, really, to make sure it stood. So we have no stand agreements in 6 seats across the country, which are basically our target seats. And we also have a sort of high level of collaboration in South Yorkshire, which is a particular area. But yeah, that's why we have no Reform candidate here.
What would your priorities be if elected as the MP for Hexham constituency?
Well, from a national point of view, our SDP priorities are basically housing and industry, particularly. Housing, I think the housing crisis is a major blight on our land. Neither the Tories nor Labour have done anything about it. In fact, they've made it worse. Both parties have made it worse. And we now have a generation, literally a younger generation called Generation Rent, who not only struggle to get a place on the housing ladder, but struggle to pay the exorbitant rents that a very tight rental market causes. And the sad thing is that the ultimate causes of this are quite clear, but are denied, I think, in much of the commentary. The cause of the housing crisis, the fundamental cause, is the deliberate destruction of state sector house building in this country. The state used to, post-war, post-Second World War, the state used to outbuild the private sector in every year until 1970. Then it slowly dwindled through the 70s, 80s was worse, and then in fact New Labour destroyed the sector pretty much altogether. It's a shocking statistic, but New Labour built fewer council houses than Mrs Thatcher did every year. So unless you can get the state sector back into the business of building at scale, you cannot solve the housing crisis. The private sector has never built enough houses on its own. This is a basic truth, and I think the SDP, the Social Democratic Party, we've developed a series of policies on housing which are very strong, and I'd urge people to have a look at. It's an absolutely fundamental thing. It affects not only young people's chances, but also it blocks their chance of starting a family. And if we don't deal with it, it's the UK's biggest domestic macroeconomic problem, housing. Unless we deal with it and identify the causes properly, we're in real trouble. Another problem caused by housing crisis is that it affects the cost of living crisis. Basically, if you look at the household budget, a normal household budget in the UK, housing costs are so expensive that you're paying sort of 30-40% in some cases of household budgets just on rents or mortgages, and that is again a primary cause of the cost of living crisis. So we need to deal with it, and we need sensible politics roll your sleeves up and be honest about the causes.
Your party proposes an English Parliament, similar to the Scottish Parliament at the moment, outside of London.
Yeah.
Could that be in Hexham?
It could actually, in theory. I mean, I think Yorkshire is probably the more likely, the more logical place for this to be. And the policy is basically born out of the fact that I think the devolution settlement for Scotland and Wales has left England dangling somewhat. I think there is an English question. Some people prefer to sort of try and hive England off into separate regions. And in this region we had the opportunity to vote for a North East Assembly and we rejected it, I think quite rightly. I want more decentralisation of power, but I think local authorities are the best way to do that. At the moment, most of our local authorities are basically used as sort of an outsourcing mechanism for Whitehall. We need much more autonomy. I'm proud to chair Corbridge Parish Council, and community council level is very important as well, because you can, although you don't have many statutory duties, you can do almost anything you want to if you can roll your sleeves up and do it. So we actually built 4 council houses, a limited thing. I think we're the only community council to have done this, partly because of the drive of the council itself, and I'm very committed to council housing as an idea. But just to return to the key question here on English Parliament, I think the devolution settlement left England dangling, and it needs to be dealt with. I think there's English votes for English laws is a sort of half measure, really. Of course, some people will say, if England's too big for its own parliament, it would destabilise things. But I think that's a logical flaw, because if England's too big for its own parliament, then England's too big for the union.
Now, you issued your party's manifesto on Thursday.
Yeah.
People can find that online if they would like to read through it. But I'm just going to pick up some of the points that you raised there. You advocate a form of proportional representation, the abolition of the Human Rights Act and the Supreme Court, the withdrawal from the European Court of Human Rights and the 1951 Refugee Convention, the reformation of the House of Lords, the withdrawal from the European Convention of Human Rights, and you say that all public bodies, their equality, equity, diversity and inclusion roles should be abolished. Are you just the Reform Party in a different shirt?
Not at all. I mean, the list that you've highlighted there is some cultural policy. I think just to address some of those, so the ECHR and the post-war protocols on refugees, I think are completely outdated. I think we have a real problem on the south coast of a border which is not capable of being enforced. It actually can't be enforced if you leave the legal architecture in place. So the system is broken. I think Labour will have. I think the Rwanda scheme is basically a publicity stunt that won't work. I think the Labour Party will have an even bigger problem, because unless you deal with the incentives, the flow will increase. No, Reform's economic vision is totally different to ours. I think it couldn't be more different, really. I think there are 1 or 2 areas that we agree on. I think Britain's good enough to govern itself. We agree on that. Immigration, I think there's broad agreement, although our policies are different to how we would tackle that. But the economics is completely different. I think there's scarcely, if you look across sort of 20 or 30 main policy domains, because economics underpins so many of them, we probably wouldn't agree on many. But I think if you believe in proportional representation and you believe in voting reform, it's incumbent on you, built into that actually, is to work with parties that do have different views, and that was the view we came to, and I think it's the right one.
You don't support the drive towards net zero. Why is that?
We do support decarbonisation. Climate change is real, you've got to accept that, and I think the push towards decarbonisation is correct. What we criticise is, I think, short-term and foolish net zero policies which will further deindustrialise the economy. And you've got to grasp that Britain has a huge trade problem. We run very, very large trade deficits. I think this year's trade deficit will be circa 80 or 90 billion. And by the way, half of that trade deficit is importing energy, basically, importing gas and hydrocarbons. Do you know what the biggest single export from the United States is to this country? Crude oil. Yeah, that's what we do. It's crazy. It's literally beggaring us. I speak to a lot of people in SW1, a lot of politicians from other parties. Very, very few that I speak to understand trade economics at all. They don't understand that if you run trade deficits, you will gradually get poorer. That's what's happening. So the people that say that we should go headlong into net zero rapidly, if that causes deindustrialization, further deindustrialization, you are literally throwing many of our industrial towns in the Midlands and the North on the scrap heap. To put it crudely, what has actually happened is that Thatcherite right-wing free trade ideology has deindustrialized our towns. We've gutted the factories, closed the factories, shipped the jobs abroad. And what's happened is that literally as soon as the factories are closed, the drug dealers move in. We've wrecked our industrial towns. And I think it's an absolute disgrace. So when I think about net zero, I'm totally accept the science on climate change, totally accept that. But I think what I'm not prepared to do is to break our industrial capacity and break communities on the back of this before we've built nuclear power stations. So the only solution to this, to decarbonise properly and in an orderly manner, is to create a new fleet, a large fleet of British nuclear power stations, and that's the SDP's policy. If you do that properly over the next 10, 15, 20 years, you can really decarbonise. Then you have the base load to do it. And that's what we're arguing. I think there's a lot of posturing and a lot of very unrealistic policy coming out. But if you further wreck your industry, you're in real trouble.
And your party proposes nationalising state monopolies, things like the railways, gas, water.
Yeah.
Where's the money going to come from to do that?
Well, let's just deal with the fundamentals first, because everyone says, where's the money going to come from? And funnily enough, when they want to do something, when the government want to do something, they certainly find the money. Look at the lockdowns. They found 450 billion rapidly when they wanted to do that. They spent 38 billion on test and trace, and just threw it down the drain effectively. So I won't have it that the money isn't there. Think about the water industry. It's a natural monopoly. And it's ours, it's the public's. It's not there to be split off and hived off, which is what the Tories did, and sold it to international banks and international investors, and in fact many international states. A lot of states own this. So I think that's wrong. I think it's deeply unpatriotic. I think it's philosophically wrong. It's a natural monopoly. It should be in public hands. And that's our policy. So ditto with the railways. The railways, Tories' idea on the railways was to basically split them up. So the state does the heavy lifting with all the track, and then you give a free opportunity to Trenitalia, SNCF, the Dutch railways and the German railways to run our railways at a profit and ship the profits abroad. Terrible for the balance of payments, terribly unpatriotic. I think the Tories don't have a patriotic bone in their body, most of them. And just a disastrous policy that is not thought through. On the money is there because say if you take water, remember if we renationalise the water industry, we bring it back into public hands, we have an asset. It's a revenue question. It's a capital question, not a revenue question. We propose to raise the money through a new bond. It would be effectively a water bond, a new treasury bond. I believe that as long as you don't pay more than the water industry is worth to bring it back into public hands, it's entirely rational to do that. So that's what we would do it, and you wouldn't do it absolutely overnight. Obviously the treasury market's been quite jumpy since Liz Truss had a go at it previously, so you've got to be careful. But that's the way to raise the money to buy these public assets, bring them back into public ownership.
You say you're a party of the family. You propose that priority would be given to British married couples when allocating council and social housing. Why is that?
Why is that? Because the family is the foundation of society, and the epidemic of family breakdown again is something that I think most British politicians of both left and right are too cowardly to actually address and confront and be honest about. and all the social science, all the quantitative data on this is in. Mum and dad staying together, bringing up their own kids is good for the kids and it's good for society. It's there to create responsible adults. That's what the family does. Now, the situation in Britain is particularly acute. Family breakdown is at epidemic levels. A British 16-year-old is more likely to have a screen in their room than a father in the house, and that's a major problem. When you have things like knife crime epidemics occurring in the big cities particularly, but we've been affected by that here, a politician won't generally, they'll talk about, at the very superficial level, they'll talk about youth clubs. I think that level of politics is risible, absolutely risible. Look at the causes. Family stability on a macro population level is a predictor of worse outcomes in crime, education, mental health and everything else. So, let's be honest about it. If you're honest about it, you'll do something about it. So what the SDP does is we produce policy which will actually support families and parents raising children. So we're very clear about it. Unless the state can actually help, and in particular reduce the stress on families, because a lot of family breakdown is caused by financial and other stress, and that's why we value housing so much. Housing. I mean, having a decent, secure home, that's the basics. And if the state can't deliver that, families are going to be under more pressure, and you're going to get more marital breakup and more misery. So that's the fundamental reason why the SDP is so strongly in favour of backing the British family. You will get people saying, well, it's too trad, the social conservatism is too trad there. Families, we're liberal in the SDP, we're not liberals. So just to be clear on that, families now come in all shapes and sizes. We're not wanting to demonise any particular group, and they do. And also families don't, family life doesn't always work out. And some of the victims of that are not just the kids, but mum and dad themselves. So it's not to be like that, but I think you've got to be honest about causes. And I think if something is good, like the traditional family, I think you've got to back it and be honest. And also I would say something on that. If you don't agree with us, don't vote for us.
So a woman who's desperate to get a house and for her and her kids, but perhaps is suffering domestic violence or something like that, would she go back to the back of the queue? If
no, I don't think she would. And at the moment, she's right at the front of the queue. She's right at the front of the queue. But I'll acknowledge what we say is controversial to some. But unless you're prepared to back to give something for the married family. I'm going to give you another example, the tax system. At every election, every single election, the Tories might mention family life. It's the same as their attitudes on immigration. Don't listen to anything they say on this. It's not worth listening to. For the rest of the 4 years that they're in power, they do absolutely nothing to help the family at all. So, on the tax system, we have a policy of full sharing of tax allowances between parents. They don't have to be married, but parents raising children. And that means that mum and dad together can earn 25,000 quid, over 25,000 quid without paying a penny in tax. That's a massive commitment, which we've costed, and you've got to do it. It's a massive commitment to the family. Now, when you explain it to people, they love that policy, and it should be national policy. And unless we can get behind families, you will simply have more family disintegration and you'll have more misery. So we're keen on taking our politics very seriously. I say I think I ought to be the happiest political leader in Britain, because actually on most of these things, most of the public agree with us. So we have enough people that do agree with us. If you don't agree with us, fine, vote for someone else. But we're going to take these difficult questions on and try and be honest and offer real policy solutions.
What difference could it make to local people here in the Hexham constituency if they voted for you as the new Hexham MP in the general election?
Good question. Well, I obviously we've talked about national issues mostly, but actually I'm basically a communitarian politician locally. I mean, what I've done in Corbridge is very much concentrate on public realm, concentrate on keeping the place nice and tidy and clean. And I think most of Tyndale, we're very lucky. We're very fortunate. It's a beautiful part of the world, and we know it. It really is. But we could always do better. So my focus for Hexham, Prudhoe, Holtwhistle, Ponthill and the rest of the constituency and the outlying parts are to concentrate on public realm. Public realm really, really matters. You walk into, or you drive into, you visit a town or a village, and you can see immediately if it's loved. You know if it's loved, and it's loved if things are looked after. And I think there's a lot of things the state can't do, and there's a lot of things the state can do. But I think public realm, as your MP, I put right to the top of the list. And I have to say, in Hexham's case, having the bus station, which is at the centre of the town, just lying idle, and the massive severance that you have of the ropery, getting a bit local now, but the ropery and the link to the Marks and Spencer site is just not acceptable. We can't have dereliction of that kind long term in our town centres. We've got to love these places and do better.
Who funds the SDP?
The members, just the members. So it's very traditional. So we don't have a great pipeline of money from the unions or big business. We're not in the pockets of anything like that. So one of the advantages of this party, and why it's such a privilege to lead it, is that we are funded entirely by our members and supporters. That's it. So we just charge memberships and we get some donations from members. I think there's a massive advantage to that because you can tell the truth.
William, thank you very much for talking to Hexham TV.
Pleasure, Peter. Thank you. Take care.
Hexham TV is endeavouring to interview all the candidates in the Hexham constituency standing in the general election. The Labour candidate and the Liberal Democrat candidate have already been interviewed, as well as William today. There are 3 other candidates who are standing, and they will all be offered and have been offered an opportunity to have a similar interview with Hexham TV. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.